Good morning and welcome to Horizon Unitarian Universalist Church and our online worship. I'm the Reverend Laura Brandis, minister of this congregation, and I welcome you this morning. We have a guest preacher for our Sunday morning worship. Well, maybe he's not a guest because he's actually our affiliated community minister, the Reverend Rob Moore. He is filling our virtual pulpit this morning, continuing to explore our monthly theme of renewal. So I welcome you, seekers all. If you've come here for a word of courage or challenge or comfort, a word to help you renew your spirit during this time, welcome. This week's one thing you can do. One thing you can do is ask your friends if they are registered to vote. Don't assume that everyone you know is registered to vote. Some people may have moved recently and didn't change their address on their voter registration material, so they'll need to do that so that they can vote in this year's election. The deadline to register to vote is October 5th. So one thing you can do is check in with 10 friends to see if they're registered to vote. If that is daunting, that would be daunting to me, quite honestly. How about 5 friends? You make the goal. But it's one thing you can do this week before we get to the deadline of October 5th. You can ask your friends if they're registered to vote, or I'm giving you an option this week. You can have a hard conversation with someone in your life who says they're not going to vote. Ask them to vote. We're not asking them to vote in a certain way. We are asking everyone we know this year to vote. It is our right and our privilege. So ask someone you know to vote. And now let's ready ourselves to enter into sacred time and sacred space that we create on our own, yet together in this virtual space. Please welcome the Reverend Rob Moore with his message for you this morning.
Greetings to you all. I am so glad you are here, and I am so happy to be leading worship for and with you today. I am the Reverend Rob Moore, the affiliated community minister for Horizon UU Church, and a spiritual director and retreat leader. To call us to worship this morning, I invite you to hear these words from the Reverend Scott Taylor from our Soul Matters curriculum. We who long for return, who long for repair, gather again to mend the tender strands of connection between each other, the world, and those parts of ourselves buried deep. We begin once more the work of welcome, of forgiveness, of renewing the weary, worn world. Come, friends, a new day, a new story awaits. In this spirit, we light our chalice. And in this spirit, we come to worship together. Please join me now in saying the words of our affirmation for this church. Love is the doctrine of our church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humanity in harmony with the earth. Thus do we covenant together.
Well, behind me, I have some of my favorite books about heroes from when I was a child. And about now, I really wish a hero would swoop in and save the day. And I'm recording about 18 hours after the death of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And our nation faces yet another time of turmoil and disruption. And how I wish one of those heroes could just come and make everything better. But did you know we're all heroes and we're all on a hero's journey? Reverend Rob will talk about the hero's journey today. And it has a lot to teach us about how we can live through this time in our lives. So, what is this hero's journey? Well, the hero's journey is a term that was used by Joseph Campbell. He began using it in 1949 to describe tales or stories in which a character ventures out, faces a number of conflicts, and ultimately triumphs over adversity or monsters or villains. And Joseph Campbell studied tales from all over the world, from all eras. And he wrote a book called The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And it retold dozens of stories to show how each hero represents a monomyth or the hero's journey. So what makes up this hero's journey? As you can see, it's a cycle. It begins in the ordinary world. It passes into a special world, which may be unknown or dangerous, and then returns to the ordinary world. So there are some key events that happen as the hero travels. There's a call to adventure, which is first resisted. Then there's assistance by someone older or wiser, a mentor. And then finally, our hero departs. There will be trials, and they will approach their main crisis, their main trial. And sometimes during this crisis, the hero is badly injured or dies, only to be reborn. Then some sort of treasure is gotten. The treasure could not only be actual treasure, it could be knowledge or finishing a task. And then the result is obtained. Finally, their hero begins their return to the ordinary world, but the return is not to their old life. There's a new life. The plots are resolved, and then the hero returns back to their old lives, but the old life has been changed, and the hero has been changed too. So many popular books, movies, and TV shows follow this ancient formula. And our lives follow this formula too, especially in a time of crisis. The hero's journey gives us comfort because the myth exists in all human cultures and keeps getting updated as we reflect on our world and the symbolic stories of our own lives. So when we have to step out or are forced outside of our comfort zone, the departure, or learn from someone older and wiser than us, the mentor, and when we doubt ourselves at first and yet step out, we are living out the process that makes us heroes, so human and so brave. So you leave your comfort zone by choice or by force. You have an experience that transforms you, and then you recover and you do it again. So we don't literally slay dragons or wizards or fight the bad guys, but you face problems every day that are just as scary. And we're in one of those situations right now. There's a pandemic, and we're trying to survive a nation in turmoil. So watch how this formula plays out in books and movies and TV shows that you come across, and in your own life. You will certainly see it. Listen for the call. Accept the challenge. Face the trials. Know that you are human and a hero and on the hero's journey.
And now we come to the practice of giving. As always, Horizon continues to support MetroCrest services with financial and physical donations. We will have our third drive-by and drop-off event this Saturday, the 26th. MetroCrest still urgently needs toothbrushes, toothpaste, shampoo, bar soap, deodorant, body wash, laundry soap, dish soap, feminine pads, and tampons. We look forward to seeing you on Saturday. For our third Sunday Share the Plate recipient, we are excited to partner with Mothers Against Police Brutality. Mothers Against Police Brutality was founded in 2013 by Colette Flanagan after her son, Clinton Allen, an unarmed 25-year-old African American and father of two, was shot to death by Dallas police. Losing a child is the most devastating thing that can happen in your lifetime, Colette said as she launched MAPB. But losing a child to police violence is like a tsunami that blows your family, your life, your very world into 1,000 lost pieces. MAPB seeks to change policing in America by building a network of families who have suffered the loss of a loved one to police brutality, and their supporters to bring a national solution to what is undeniably a national crisis. MAPB advocates national standards on police use of deadly force so that all of us living in America can expect our constitutional rights to be respected by police officers, whether we live in Minneapolis or Ferguson or Dallas. MAPB's work involves organizing, advocacy, and research, all grounded in the lived experience of families who know directly the grave injustice of police brutality. As Colette says, we must turn our grief into determination to win justice for all children. So as always, you can donate online at horizonuu.org, and we thank you for these gifts, for this organization, for MetroCrest services, and your continued gifts toward the ministry and mission of this church. Love is the doctrine, the teaching of this church. And it is with this principle that we are present with one another through our joys, sorrows, and especially in the ways that these things tend to arrive all at once in one tangled blessing we call life. We continue to hold in our hearts Wendy Sue, who is still recovering from a recent hospital stay. She and George welcome assistance with meals during this recovery. Please see the latest newsletter for sign-ups. We are also present to the joys and sorrows of this world, knowing how interdependent we are with all of creation. In that spirit, we hold in our hearts and minds all people, creatures, and ecosystems affected by the fires on the West Coast and the latest hurricane to make landfall. And finally, today, we mourn the great loss of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg on Friday night. This loss has hit many of us particularly hard. I have seen many comments in the last few hours that simply say, "I am bereft." Justice Ginsburg is a true lion of the court. Her life lived in the pursuit of equality for women and really for all of us, which will be remembered quite well by history and by all those who loved and respected her. In her later years, she has become something of a rock star with the nickname the Notorious RBG. I have seen more than a few pictures today of girls and young women dressed as her for Halloween. I suspect we now may see many more this year. And while we mourn and offer our prayers for her family and loved ones, let us take up her cause for equality, equality for all, in fitting tribute to a life very well lived. Beyond these we have named aloud, let us honor those joys and sorrows that remain unknown, yet live in the silence of our hearts. Let us honor the stories of heartache or hope, beauty and loss. For all those places that need forgiveness, may forgiveness be given and received. For the division in our nation, in our families, and in our lives, may we be restored to a new wholeness. And for the many blessings of our lives, may our hearts be overcome with gratitude. As I light this final candle, let us feel the ways we are all connected to each other and to all beings, knowing that what affects one affects us all. So may it be, and amen. I invite you now to join me in a time of prayer, meditation, and silence. As we enter in this time, I invite you to find a place of comfort, of support, of balance. Let's take a few deep breaths to bring us more fully into this time and place. To allow our bodies to relax, to ease, if only for a moment. As you let your breath fall to its natural rhythm, let us hear these words from the Reverend Beckett Coppola. Let go of the idea that you know what breathing should feel like. Just notice the breath as it moves in and out of the body. Let go of certainty. Be with the breath as it is. Allow openness. Allow curiosity. Notice the mind, each thought that arises. Allow openness. Don't judge your mind or your experience. Be loving in your curiosity about each thought. Let go of certainty. Let go of any idea about what you should be thinking, accepting your thoughts exactly as they are. Be with yourself as you are. Be curious about who you are. Love how you are in the world. Gently take a deep breath, maybe even a big sigh. Re-enter the present moment and the stream of your life. And in this present moment, may we be together in silence for just a moment or two. Out of this silence, the first language of the divine mystery, may we come going forward into the next present moment, a little more relaxed, a little more focused, a little more at ease and at peace. May it be so, and amen. Our reading this morning comes from Father Richard Rohr from his recent book, The Universal Christ. We grow by passing beyond some perfect order, through a usually painful and seemingly unnecessary disorder, to an enlightened reorder or resurrection. This is the pattern that connects and solidifies our relationship with everything around us. The trajectory of transformation and growth, as I see the great religions and philosophical traditions charting it, uses many metaphors for this pattern. We could point to the classic hero's journey charted by Joseph Campbell, the 4 seasons or 4 directions of most native religions, the epic accounts of Exodus, exile, and promised land of the Jewish people, followed by cross, death, and resurrection narrative of Christianity. Each of these myths, and each in its own way, is saying that growth happens in this full sequence. To grow toward love, union, salvation, or enlightenment, I use these words almost interchangeably, we must be moved from order to disorder, and then ultimately to reorder. Father Richard Rohr speaks of the universal pattern of order, disorder, and reorder. As we just heard in our brief reading, this can be talked about in using many images and metaphors. Perhaps most recognizable is the hero's journey. Our hero exists in some life of order and innocence, Maybe they don't always appreciate and enjoy that order and innocence, but there is safety, there is security, there is comfort within that early life. And then something happens, and our hero is thrust into the out of disorder and into some sort of disorder. All the trials of the journey, unfamiliar territory, unfamiliar friends and foes, unfamiliar ways of being, danger of some kind around every corner. And then by the end of the journey, a return to some sort of order, to reorder. Perhaps something close to the original order, or not. But either way, something more than the original order, something different than before. In addition to the individual's hero journey, groups, institutions, community, and nations can also follow a collective hero's journey. We are seeing that right now in this nation and our world, going through a major disorder of the pandemic. In addition to the pandemic, there is racial justice protests, there is continuing climate disasters out west and in our oceans. We are going through a major period of disorder. So let's go through these stages. And as with all things on life's journey, this doesn't happen in a linear fashion as I will be presenting it to you this morning, or all at once and done once and for all, but it continues throughout a messy and mixed up life. And so what is this period of order that we begin with? The order that we can think of as a first half of life order. It is the wonder of childhood, the investigating, the exploring, the learning that we all go through in those first 5, 10, 15, and more years as we are using that learning and that wondering and investigating to build our identities, to build our egos. And as we move on into young and middle adulthood, we are establishing our identities even more in terms of who we will be in the world. What will our job be? What are our careers? What will our home look like? Who will be with us in our home? Our relationships, building families, building safety, building security, as we knew in our early family. And as we continue moving out within this order into communities and into nations, we are building laws and traditions and boundaries. And part of those boundaries are again back toward the individual. It's the separation of me versus you. I am separate from you and you from me. I have my skills and interests and you have yours, and they are separate. They can build on each other, but as we think of in this time of order, we do think of it as separate. And this is not inherently bad in any way. We actually need this kind of order in our early life. It is that time where we build up our life and our ego and our identity and our way into the world. And as Father Richard says, there has to be some solid ground, some trust, shared security, or we cannot move outward at all. And just think about that toddler that you may know, or that maybe you had back in the day or are experiencing now, where as you're in a park or in your backyard and they go out a little further, and each time they go just past their comfort zone, they turn back and look and make sure that you are still there with them and watching and keeping watch. And so perhaps you can see the same thing in teenagers or young adults. Maybe it's not an actual look back to see if you're still there, but it happens in different ways. A text or a test of boundaries. All of those kind of behaviors that tell us, hey, they are testing their comfort level and their order and making sure that we are still there. Now, if it was only up to us, we may never leave this time of order. There is a reason that it is order, and we find it comforting and that we find ourselves safe and secure in this time. It does produce a life of comfort and of routine. Again, not necessarily a bad thing, but perhaps when the routine turns into rut or the comfort turns into complacency, maybe then it's time to shake things up. And if we get stuck in this time of order, if we never seek to transform or grow, we get stuck in this time and we start to avoid conflict, avoid inconsistency, avoid suffering and pain. And within that avoidance, we also miss out on transformation and growth. And collectively, if we get stuck, we can too easily build systems overly dependent on the letter of the law, on punishment, on competition. Again, that you versus me, us versus them. These are symptoms of being stuck in a time of order. And so something comes along, life, God, whatever you want to call it, something comes along to intervene, to give us a push, sometimes a gentle push, but I think most often a not so gentle push out of the order that we've created. And when we come face to face with that disorder, it often leads us to question the order that we've been experiencing. Maybe questioning whether it actually works for us or works for all of us. We start to see the cracks in the order, the places where doing the same things is not producing those feelings of comfort and safety anymore. And we see where there is no growth, no movement in our lives. And we also see that the order may not be working for everyone in our lives, in our communities, in our nations. And once we see that, and we see that it is not working, we must change or die, both figuratively and literally. And so what is this disorder that usually comes to us at some point? Often it is some experience of suffering, but sometimes it can be a great experience of love or wonder. We can all imagine or remember a time where something so wonderful, so full of love and compassion and forgiveness has really transformed our way of being, our way of thinking, and we don't see things the same way again. But I think a lot of times it is that experience of some disruption. And it could be death, it could be an illness, it could be infinity, it could be doubt or questioning, it could be addiction, it could be, of course, a pandemic, a disruption of some kind to our ordered thinking and being. And so within that disruption, it somehow triggers the realization that our current toolkit just is not sufficient. All that we built up in the order phase turns out to just not be enough. Father Richard again says that we will experience at least one situation in our lives that we cannot fix, control, explain, change, or even understand. And that really throws us for a loop. And so we often end up at the threshold of step 1 of the 12-step program, admitting that we are powerless and our lives have become unmanageable. And of course, this doesn't have to apply just to addictions. All sorts of life experiences can lead us to a realization of powerlessness and unmanageability. And how many of us have felt this way during these last few months with a pandemic that we can neither control or manage? And so as we come to this time of disorder, we realize that our small self, our ego self, just is not equipped to handle it in any productive or meaningful way. And so we have to move somehow to our true self, our deeper self. And when we are in the midst of this disorder, we long to return to order. That shift to our true self is not an easy shift. Our ego and our small shift do not want to give up that control easily. So we see it now in all the calls that we have seen recently to return to law and order. We see it maybe in the Exodus story of the Hebrew Scriptures, where the Israelites long to return to Egypt and the bondage therein, rather than continue into the harsh and unknown wilderness. And we cannot remain in disorder. If we get stuck in disorder and remain there, that can result in anger, in cynicism, in negativity, in burnout. We get used to the disorder, and we cannot stay there long. And so we come to the way to move to our true self, and a way to move through the disorder, and that is the way, only through, not over, not under, not around, not avoiding it. The only way is through. We've heard it many times. And so as we come to this time of disorder and realize that we are powerless, we cannot fix or control it, we realize that surrender and acceptance are the only ways through. And when I say acceptance, I don't mean that we necessarily stop working for necessary change, for the flaws that we see in the world or in ourselves, and we stop working for that. But acceptance means in this way that we acknowledge what is happening within us, acknowledge what is happening within the world, so that we can notice and feel what we feel, so that we can notice our reactions and not avoid or repress them. Because what we do not transform, we will transmit. And so we do not want to transmit that type of disorder, that disorientation that we feel to others around us. And so this is where spiritual practice comes in. It gets us there, and it begins to guide us toward a sense of reorder. There's a Buddhist practice called Tonglen, popularized by Pema Chodron recently. And it is a practice that breathes in suffering and breathes out love and compassion. You intentionally bring in the suffering, whether your own or someone else's, and then you transform it into something beautiful. Now, this is advanced stuff. I would not enter into it lightly. But this is the process of disorder. It is a call to allow us to be in the disorder, to allow the disorder to be, to accept it as it is, recognize it how it is in you and in the world. And then to give up our resistance and our control over it, and to learn how to transform it into love and compassion and into reorder. And as we let in a little more and a little more, we realize we can let in a little more and survive, that we can handle it, that we can let in a little more suffering and not be consumed by it. This is the movement toward our true self, our God self, our Buddha nature, our Christ nature, whatever you want to call it. Our small ego self cannot hold it all, but our true self surely can. And so as we move toward spiritual practice, you're in luck. Because if you've noticed in our recent newsletter that Reverend Laura is starting a series of spiritual practices next month. So get in there, start practicing. A world of reorder awaits us. And so as we continue our spiritual practice and continue making our way through the disorder, what does the reorder start to look like? I think as we go through our practice, one thing that maybe turns the corner for us from disorder to reorder is some experience of unconditional love or compassion or forgiveness. Back in June, when I was reflecting on the June theme of compassion in our Soul Matters materials, I came across the question of, have you ever been healed by the compassion of God? Now, that was a question that I really wanted to answer in the group, with the group, and talk about with the group that I met with. But I was a little nervous. Can I talk about that in a UU group, about being healed by the compassion of God? I was a little nervous to bring that up. But I went forward anyway, and it turns out, as I was the first one to kind of talk about the questions of that particular month's materials, and then after I was done, it turns out 2 or 3 or 4 other people in that group also chose that question to talk about. And so that speaks to that experience of having that unconditional experience of love, compassion, forgiveness. And I think that starts to turn the corner from disorder into reorder. Another symptom of that reorder that comes or is becoming is kind of a holding of paradox. That suddenly there's not an us, them, a you and me, but there is a right or a wrong. There's more paradox, there's more gray area. So I can both cause and do harm to others and still be worthy of love and forgiveness. Our country can be both wonderful and beautiful while at the same time being flawed and broken. I can hold questions in my mind and yet find comfort in tradition, in order. And this is maybe what we've heard as getting towards salvation, enlightenment, nirvana, paradise, heaven, resurrection, beloved community, promised land, so many metaphors that we have heard for what this can look like in a conceptual way. Now, in the real world, what does individually reorder might look like? Maybe it looks like forgiveness, including accepting and forgiving reality for what it is, forgiving a flawed and broken world. Maybe it starts to look like hope in your life, hope for what is unseen, hope even against what is seen, when all evidence is to the contrary. It's love, it's compassion, it's love that you are giving, compassion that you are giving, and also coming back to you. It is balance. All those fruits of the Spirit in the Christian scriptures, or the 5 virtues of Buddhism, however you've heard it, it is those pieces of life become to be more prevalent in your life and in your surroundings. And collectively, what can it look like? Collectively, reorder can look like perhaps a third reconstruction, giving the first reconstruction during or after the Civil War, the second reconstruction during and after the Civil Rights Movement of the 60s. Maybe it is past time now for a third reconstruction to fulfill all the not yet met promises of the first 2. Promises of equality in housing and wealth and human rights and dignity and health care and living wages and food availability and on and on and on. And perhaps if we have grown enough spiritual maturity as a nation, we can make this dream a reality this time without the white backlash that marred and buried the first 2. Perhaps reorder now can look like a Green New Deal, a similar program addressing many of these same social ills, but this time through a lens of the interconnection of all of them with climate change. And so these are just a couple of examples of what the collective time of reorder could look like. And so a new normal is being built. For some, it is a return to the time of order with no growth, with no transformation, a return to the rules, the laws, the safety, security that we thought we had. And for some of us, it is a chance and opportunity to create something new, to craft a new reorder that is beyond and something more and different than what we knew before. And so We don't embark on the hero's journey once and for all when all is well and reordered. The cycle repeats as often as we know it and we notice it and allow it to be. Each time our reorder gets a little deeper, a little more true, more whole, a little more authentic for us and for our community. And I know we are still in the midst of our current time of disorder, and it's difficult to think about what the next reorder might be and what it might look like. But we cannot remain in our disorder and wait for the reorder to come to us. Many are laying the groundwork now for what reorder looks like on the other side. I invite you now to find your place in this work, big or small, alone or with others. There is enough work for all of us. There is also inner work to be done. It could be the mindfulness that I spoke of last month. It could be the 12-step program. It could be spiritual direction, spiritual practices, whatever works for you. So let us be ready for the reorder to come and do what we can now to shape it and to mold it. And therefore, let us continue to become the whole and authentic beings and the beloved community we have always aspired to be and aspired to create. We now extinguish this flame, but not our commitment to our mission, to welcome radically, love boldly, grow spiritually, and serve courageously. We carry this commitment in our hearts until we are together again. And now we come to our closing hymn. There is a balm in Gilead, an old African-American spiritual from the days of slavery. I include it here in our service today because I've been listening to versions from Sweet Honey in the Rock and Mahalia Jackson a lot lately in the last few months. It has hit home for me with the suffering and the disorder many of us, most of us, dare I say all of us, find ourselves in and find ourselves bearing witness to these days. When I think of the question I mentioned earlier, have you ever been healed by the compassion of God? I think of this song and many spirituals like it that speak of suffering and of healing. This hymn names that suffering and offers the hope of a balm, a solution, a cure for that suffering. It speaks of making the wounded whole, of healing the sin-sick soul, and of being revived by the Holy Spirit, and of the love of Jesus who died for all. While this language may not be the language many of us would choose to speak of these things now, it is the language of suffering and deliverance from this suffering by the unconditional love and compassion of that something larger than ourselves, of that mystery that some call God. I invite you now to listen and to sing in this spirit.
There is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded If you cannot preach like Peter, if you cannot pray like Paul, you can tell the love of Jesus and say he died for all. There is a balm in Gilead to make the wounded whole. There is a balm in Gilead to heal the sin-sick soul.
As a final blessing and benediction, I offer you these words by the Reverend Joe Cherry. If we have any hope of changing the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to move into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, loving enough to forgive ourselves and others. May we, as a people of faith, be granted the strength to be so bold, so brave, and so loving. Go now in peace, and amen.